If you've ever wondered how a top grandmaster would beat Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces, then this episode 4 of the How to Beat series is for you. This game was played between Magnus Carlsen against Vladimir Fedoseev in the 2024 Chess Olympiad in Budapest, Hungary. This was a match where Fedoseev, originally born in Russia, was representing Slovenia in this match against Carlsen's Norway. And here we can already see step one of Fedoseev's approach to beating Carlsen. And it might not be what you'd expect. Maybe you're thinking, okay, against Carlsen, I have to try to, make the position crazy and get a big attack on their, his king, because otherwise he's going to grind you down, outplay with his magic endgame technique. But we see in this game, Fedoseev goes for a bit of a different approach, where rather than trying to take the fight to Carlsen, with this approach, he's basically just wanting to trade off the pieces and just get a simplified position to try and sort of frustrate Carlsen and make it really hard for him to really do anything. But let's backtrack a little bit because I went a little bit quickly through these early moves. So step one is basically to surprise Carlsen, to play something that you know really well that he maybe is not as familiar with as you. Not the easiest task when, the guy has a photographic memory, but that's step one. And we see that Thursday is already playing a little bit of a different system here with this Austrian c5 quite early. Now, for the move queen takes d4, this is actually something that Nakamura and Vishal Grav have been playing quite a bit, and I actually did a nice video on how to win in symmetrical positions featuring the Ding Nakamura game, which you might like to check out after this one if you're so inclined. But in any case, going back here after knight d4, we see it in this symmetrical position. Even though white's got this extra tempo, it's not so easy to make use of it, because if white goes knight c3, we're just going to go e5 and trade off the queens and make them play an awkward recapture after the knight moves. So that's kind of why Carlsen played bishop b5 in the game, trying to make black block with the bishop and then move the knight. But it still wasn't necessarily super effective. To be fair, black's also playing one of these good openings where it's one of these openings that is actually very reliable for black, based on very deep engine analysis, but it also hasn't been played that often. So it has that mix of surprise value and also being a good system. That's what I mean with step one of finding like a good surprise weapon against Carlsen. And then from there, step two is basically knowing the position better than he does, which is not necessarily the easiest task, because like I said, Carlsen knows quite a lot about chess. He knows a lot more about chess than I know about it, and I think I know a lot about it as a chess grandmaster. But that's step two. And Fedoseev actually succeeded in this because it turns out that these next moves we're going to see, he basically prepared the first 20 moves of this game. So just to kind of show you Fedoseev's preparation before the game, he plays, kicking around the bishop, wanting to play soccer with it and try and trap the bishop or even kick away the knight. So white plays the move f3, making that little bit of an escape for the bishop. And it looks weird, but knight h6 does actually have a logic that you are trying to get rid of their knight as such. White plays the move bishop f2, and Carlsen, even though he has been surprised and has used up a lot of time, he has continued to play good moves because, well, he's just the greatest chess player of all time. But after rook hd1 takes, and h4, so we see here that there's a little bit of an imbalance where with the double pawns, the pawn on f5 can come under a little bit of fire. So Carlsen decides to defend it with the move king to d3. And this is where we start to get to step three of how to beat Carlsen. Step one is to, surprise him in the opening with a system that's also quite good. Step two is then to know the rising position better than he does with your preparation. And then step three is to get him to overpress. So let's see how that works with this game. Because after rook g5, so that's asking the question of how white is going to defend the pawn. Because if white plays g4, well, after takes, and h takes g3, well, you're just going to play g6 and, basically hoover all the pieces off the board and just make a solid draw. And because, Carlsen's the best chess player in the world, the one advantage we have over him being the highest rated, is that he doesn't really want to draw with the white pieces against us, right? Us being whoever is like watching this. But on the other hand, we can also use that against him and say, well, if you're not happy with a draw, well, we're just going to play really solidly, play, really good moves, and make you try to overpress to try to win the game. And so white plays a move rook g1, just trying to keep some of the pieces on the board, asking white how he will deal with the attack asking black, I should say, how he will deal with the attack on the H pawn. This one actually makes kind of a fun puzzle because this is the move that really started to set up the potential for Feather Save to actually win this game. So if you want to see if you're playing like a 2-700 Grandmaster, do let me know down in the comments below what move you would play here as black. And for those who want to use the chess notation, this is move 22 for black. So you can say 22 and then the move you would play in notation. Also, if you are enjoying this video, you're enjoying the How to Beat series in case you've been watching it for a bit, then do make sure to subscribe to the channel. It'll just allow you to improve your chess and just enjoy your chess a lot more along the way. So here black found a really great move. Now it is true if we just do nothing, like say if we play a waiting move, they might even just take our pawn for free. So we do have to do something here as black. A move like rook h5 is a little bit passive because then the rook is stuck defending just one pawn. The rook dreams of open lines, not playing, babysitter duty. But black plays the move g6, and that's one of the more advanced thinking techniques I like to teach my students, how to deal with the opponent's threats by finding a way to effectively ignore them. Now you might be wondering, well, Max, what if white just takes and, just says that they're going to grab the pawn? But you're assuming that chess is checkers. You're assuming that we have to take that pawn. Not so. We can play the move f5. Let's say they move the king out of check and we take their pawn. Now, if white takes that pawn on h4, it's actually a bit of a poison pawn because we have the counter bishop c5 attacking the defender of the g2 pawn. So that when that rook moves out of the attack, we take their pawn. And that's not all, baby. We are also attacking two of their pawns at the same time, meaning that we're the ones that are actually winning the pawn when the dust settles here. Okay, to be fair, they can actually play rook e2 and defend them both, but the position is still going to be better for white if they have three pawn islands and we only have two, meaning it's much easier for us to attack their pawns than it is for Carlsen to attack our pawns here. So that explains a little bit why Carlsen decided to go bishop takes h4. Because if he's not winning a pawn anyway, okay, let's at least, give black the double pawns. But as the best man at my wedding liked us to say, the double pawns aren't always bad. And here, no, they do actually give you a little bit of space to work with. The fact they're in one pawn island kind of means they're a little bit more solid than if they were, kind of split up. Like, say, if white had double pawns on f2, f3, h2, you can sort of see it's kind of hard to move those pawns, but here black doesn't have that problem quite as much. After king to e6, at this point, if you want to really have some fun here, you could play a move like knight to d4, king f7, and then sacrifice your bishop, saying that if white takes, that you have a draw with knight e6 and knight c7 and this sort of thing. But okay, this video is not how to draw with Carlsen as black. It's how to beat Carlsen as black. To be fair, I'm not greedy like if I have a chance to take a draw of Carlsen as black, I'm going for it, man. But the same as one of these players who'll just play for a win against any player, even Magnus Carlsen. And he says, let's keep the game going. Let's go bishop c5 and ask you how you like them apples. So I played rook h1. Knight d4 is played. And it was at this point that Carlsen made his first mistake of the game. Up to this point, he's played pretty much all the right moves as you sort of expect from the best player in the world. But here is where he starts to slip up, even though there's only two legal moves in this position. Like, even if you just flip a coin, it's like a 50% chance of getting it right here. And a 50% chance of playing a better move than Carlsen did. But yeah, that basically leads us to kind of step. So, step 3 was, get Carlsen to kind of overpress. And then step 4 is, basically to kind of punish him when he does overpress. Which is kind of ironic because the move he played of king d5 actually looks kind of less like overpressing than the move king f7, which is the move that white should have played here, going for the fork, as it were. I mean, maybe Carlsen was a bit concerned that, like, maybe his king is, like, so far advanced that, maybe the king is getting mated or, to be fair, more likely to, knight f3. And it looks like, white's down a pawn. It's looking like a bit of a problem. However, there is a saying that, one runner is faster than two, because with two, you kind of have to run, like, side by side to support each other. Whereas this H pawn isn't weighted down by anybody. It's got the rook behind the pass pawn supporting it, and we just go boom, 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 and it's suddenly not so easy for black to stop the pawn. Now, the computer will sort of rain on the parade a bit and say, oh, but you can sacrifice your bishop for the pawn, and then you take the pawn on b2, and you just trade off all the pawns and you draw. with a piece less because they can't promote a pawn to a queen. But we're going to ignore the computer because it doesn't know what it's talking about, and we're going to focus on the game where Carlsen says the king is belongs in the center. The king's in the center. If it was king of the hill, I would have won already. Unfortunately for him, it's not king of the hill. After b6, well, suddenly the king is kind of running out of squares to go to because you can't really go this way, and maybe we need a little bit of fantasy. But like, imagine we teleport the king to b4 and the rook's on goes to d7. Well, I mean that's already checkmate, and it's a long way off, but a man can dream. And white plays the move f4 here, trying to give black the Irish pawns. And I'm 25% Irish, so I take some offense to them being called Irish pawns, but not that much offense. But seriously, though, the idea is that white will go bishop f2 and try and take the knight, as it were, and get Harry the H pawn running down the board. So instead of falling into the plan, this is where we get to step 5 of how to beat Carlsen, and that is to just continue playing great moves in the endgame. The way to beat Carlsen in endgame is basically to play like Carlsen, and that's exactly how Fedosave does it. Finding a fantastic move of knight to c2. Why knight c? I've actually said like the move that was black's threat. I got so excited about the threat, I said move b before move a. This is why king d7 was played, because if white takes pawn, which by the way is what he should have done, but is not what he did, well then you go knight c2. And so step 5, yeah, is basically just to trick Carlsen, like just set up checkmating threats that he doesn't know how to deal with. However, the thing is that white gets to make a move as well. Now, if you play a move like e takes f6, saying I'm just going to go down with full belly, well, the problem is after knight e3 and rook g4 that you're going to get mated with the bishop next move. So that's why probably Carlsen didn't play this way. But the computer, has a way to rain on the parade and says, oh, but you throw in an intermezzo with e6. And if you play king c7 to keep the mating pattern, well, bishop g3 comes with a check. You can't ignore a check in this position as such. And if you play rook takes g3 so that you still have checkmate, oh, but I'm the computer. I see everything. I flick in the knight b5 intermediate move. And then I flick in knight d6 as well. And then I can take the rook and not get mated. This is what the computer is saying. Like, the computer has a way just to ruin anyone's brilliant idea, unfortunately. But Carlsen, as great as he is at chess, is not stockfish. And after king d7, he panicked and said, oh no, I'm getting mated with knight c2 and knight e3. Keep in mind, he was also in time trouble. He didn't have time to figure out all these genius moves that stockfish just says like in 1 second. And so, being a human, he played the move g4, like trying to mix it up, trying to confuse things. And it actually worked here because Fedosave actually didn't find the best move. It turns out that, well, step 5 is to play like Carlsen in the endgame, and well, maybe it's encouraging you don't have to play absolutely perfect chess. Like, you don't have to cheat with stockfish necessarily to beat Carlsen if you just play a really, really good game. It turns out knight c2 is actually still winning here, because if white plays g takes f5 so that it's not going to be checkmate, well, then black plays rook to g4, and it gets just like absolutely disgusting where you are going to go for knight e3, and then after they take the pawn, you give checkmate with bishop to d6. And I can't solve that by playing bishop e5 because then you're blocking your own escape. Just absolutely disgusting. Fedosave was also in time trouble. He said, I see a pawn, I take a pawn, and play f takes g4, which will open the door for white to play f takes e5, and suddenly Carlsen is back in the game. And that's sort of step 6 of how to beat Carlsen. If you miss the first chance, you just have to keep playing good moves in the endgame and pray that he gives you a second chance to win. A lot of the times he won't because it is Magnus Carlsen after all. But in this game, Fedosave did get his chance. White's best bet here is probably just to move the bishop and just play as if you're not down a pawn, which is one of the hardest things for a human to do. Instead, White said, oh, I've got to be forcing. Let's use the force like Luke Skywalker. He takes the bishop with check, bishop g3, now rook d6. And even though the material is equal, even though White has the bishop versus the knight on the open board, it's Black who's better because this pawn is under attack. If you try to move the pawn, then the A pawn gets taken. If you try to defend this pawn, well, then the h2 pawn is going to fall. So it's just problems everywhere for White here. And, the computer will say, oh, it doesn't matter. You just sacrifice a pawn, you liquidate and you make a draw, but not as easy if you're a human. And after rook c1, that's a move that if black takes the pawn, Carlsen would set his trap of rook c4, taking back the pawn, just liquidating everything. The more pawns that come off the board, the easier it is to make a draw. And something like, bishop takes h2, and then king d5, white would be able to get back a pawn one way or the other and be able to draw the rook ending despite being a pawn down. This is what Carlsen was banking his hopes on. Maybe against most players it would have worked and they would have fallen for it, but Fedorsev saw one step ahead of Carlsen. He realized that if he flicks in the move of king e6 first, I'm very impressed by the way if Andrew even considered the move king e6 because it's a pretty tough move to find, especially when you're under time pressure. With king e6, you're just preparing to take that pawn without running into bishop takes e5. You still have the option to take that pawn on b2. And now if white plays rook c4 like in the other line, this is the difference. You play king f5, you defend the pawn with the king, you get ready to take that pawn on h2. And even though at this point the passed pawns are split, you still have two passed pawns to their one. And last I checked, two beats one. So after a4, Fedorsev, he's top grandmaster. He probably studied this endgame when he was like 8 or 9 years old at the Pioneers Palace in Moscow. And yeah, at this point, Black's just going to push the pawns with the help of the king, because the king and the pawn beat the rook at the end of the day. So even though White is going to eventually get his pawn to promotion, the problem is that when the dust settles, we like a little shelter against checks from the pawn. After a7, e2, rook e7, king f2, rook f7, king e3, just being very technical, just making sure to get that king out of the way of the checks. Finally, after king c1, rook c7, you might not be able to block with the rook because that allows the pawn to queen, but here is where you use the opponent's pieces against them. Black played king to b1. You can't play check because the king is in the way. Black's threatening to queen a pawn, and if you try to stop one of them, the other one's going to do a runner, where if you're threatening to queen a pawn with check, you try to stop one, the other one's going to queen. And this is why, in this position, Carlsen resigned. An absolutely great performance by Fedorsev. Definitely one of the best games of his career thus far, without a doubt. And if for like even a player like Gukesh or Nakamura or Caroline, like even for these players, like beating Carlsen with black is in classical is like pretty magical, of course, because he's the best player in the world. But let's just break down like what the steps were in terms of how to actually win against Carlsen with the black pieces. And again, I'm saying it's much easier to say how someone else do it than to say this is how you'll do it yourself. But it's a fun hypothetical, like just play with us, okay? And so step one is to prepare a surprise, something that will take Carlsen out of his very extensive knowledge of being prepared by 100 seconds or however many seconds he has helping with openings. That's step one. Step two is then to know that little surprise, that shortcut better than he does, so that at least even if he's still a better player than you are, at least you're going to get a time advantage out of the opening, so that you can try to neutralize that skill edge just a little bit. Step three is then basically to just play really solidly and just sort of give him room to overpress. Get him kind of running the king down the board, thinking that it's touch football, not chess. And then step four is basically once you get into overpress, to then just play the end game as well as Carlsen. Easier said than done, but Fedorsev did manage in the game. Step five then being to create the mating threats against his king, make his life really difficult, and then get him to crack so that eventually you will win the end game. So there you have it. That's the 5 steps to beat Magnus Carlsen. I would say, good luck to doing this against Carlsen in your own games because A, you'll need some good luck just to play him, and B, you'll need a lot of good luck to beat him if you are lucky enough to play him. But that is, in theory, how you would beat Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, this fun hypothetical of how it would work in theory at the very least. And yeah, if you do have any suggestions for other topics, for this how to beat series, then do let me know that as well. Definitely interested to hear different ideas. And like I said, this is a series that I'm planning to do like for all of October, just as something a little bit different, a little bit fun, as it were. But yeah, on that note, I will see you in the next episode of the How to Beat series. Maybe you'll watch them out of order. I don't really care too much either way. But yeah, I'll see you in whichever next one you see. And until then, take care.